Kautilya's methodology. When Bikram Sampatji was referring about Purva Paksha and Uttar Paksha, that one is spelled by Kautilya in Tantra Yukti in chapter 15's Adhikaran of Arthashastra. Right? If you will read that, you will find fantastic one. Now we have another speaker, Dr. Koenraad Elst. Dr. Koenraad Elst studied at the KU Lebanon, obtaining a degree in sinology, Indology, and philosophy. After research stay at Banaras Hindu University, he did original field work for the doctorate on Hindu nationalism, which he obtained magna cum laude in 1998. As an independent researcher, he earned laurels and ostracism with his findings on hot items like Islam, multiculturalism, and secular state. The root of Indo-European, the Ayodhya temple, mosque dispute, and Mahatma Gandhi's legacy. He also published on interface of religion and politics, the reinvention of Hindu Dharma, and technical points of Hindu and Chinese philosophy. Today he will be speaking on Marx and his legacy. Koenraad Elst, please.
Okay. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the organizers and especially Professor Nachiketa Tiwari for putting all this together and for inviting me. So here we go. The influence of Marxism in India. We start with Karl Marx. He was a typical bourgeois intellectual who never much worked in his life, who fathered an illegitimate son upon his housemaid, and all the typical stuff. He was quite meritorious as a journalist, as a spreader of ideas. Indeed, there is no common measure between the little writing he did and the geopolitical influence he has had, and to some extent still has. He was much less meritorious as an economist. His book Das Kapital, which is unreadable, and which me too, I have only browsed a little, that has had an enormous influence. But the really most read work of Karl Marx, written in Brussels, is the Communist Manifesto. That the working class has nothing to lose but its chains. And, he was very good at coining memorable phrases. And so the main lesson of that work is that the history of every society is the history of class struggle. And so he introduces a conflict model of sociology, which is countered soon after by the Catholic Church in their doctrine of social harmony, which is quite parallel to what will develop in India as a counter to communism. In the 1960s, you had the launching of integral humanism by Deen Dayal Upadhyay, which incidentally is the same term launched already in the 1930s in France in perfectly similar circumstances. You see, there too, communism was a rising force. It was godless. That was the set phrase at the time, godless communism. And so religious people tried to find an answer to that, recognizing that some social change was necessary and inevitable, but rejecting the conflict model. And so in my very short time, that's the main theme I'd like to emphasize, the role of the idea of a conflict model. Both capitalism and its specific form of colonialism has a double role in Marxism. It is rejected in the sense that we should have socialism and equality. Nevertheless, it's also praised, and it has a useful role in history because it comes to destroy the earlier phase of feudalism, or in some societies, the earlier phase is slavery, which in Europe was an even earlier phase in the Greco-Roman period. And so it comes to break up all kinds of traditional social structures like the aristocracy, like the family as an economic unit. You know, in the old system, a father used to learn a son used to learn his trade from his father and so on, taking over the family business. All that starts cracking up. And colonization is the way of, you know, progressive societies to export this breakdown of feudalism to quote unquote backward societies like India. And so Marxism really is only anti-capitalism and anti-colonialism once the alternative of socialism starts dawning. But so before that, it has a necessary and constructive role in history. In 1917, you get the famous Russian coup d'etat known as revolution, which is a very flattering term. You see here the Great Four with the fourth one. The one on the right is Trotsky, Leon Trotsky, who actually led the Red Army to victory. Then soon after, he gets, you know, sidelined by Stalin, who is the right-hand man in the picture below. Stalin says famously that to be a true communist, you have to put loyalty to the Soviet Union first. And so, totally ignoring the economic dimension of Marxism, you see this for the Hindu movement in India becomes the main reason to oppose communism. But so economically, they're not very serious about opposing it. When socialism comes into vogue in the 60s, we see in the Jansang also a shift towards socialism. As Ram Swarup said at the time, you see, in India, there is a multiplicity of parties, but a unity of slogans. Like, for instance, nowadays, development, every party is for development. It's hard to find a party that is for Hinduism. It also supports atheism worldwide. And so in India, that, among other things, means support to secularism. Communism enters India formally with the creation of the Communist Party of India, which didn't happen in India, but in Tashkent, in Uzbekistan, by M.N. Roy. It was an interesting character. And in fact, you see, many nationalists will like him if you see the facts of his life. In the First World War, he tried to involve German support for the revolution against the British in India. He has a very lasting influence. Like, he's the one who introduces the idea that Islam came to India for social equality, and that the masses in India were yearning for Islam and very gladly converted to Islam. So you see all the Muslims you see around you, they are the descendants of the progressive part of the masses who seized the opportunity of Islam, whereas you people, you know, you are backward and so on. At the end of his life, M.N. Roy himself quit communism and chose something he called radical humanism. But so his influence is enormous. Okay. Yeah, these are the great five. I'm told that in West Bengal there is a temple where they worship this picture here of Mao Zedong and all the others. As Jyoti Basu said, you see, China's chairman is also India's chairman. The economic policy of communism becomes very influential in India. Jawaharlal Nehru was a follower of the Fabian socialism, which he learned in Cambridge, with a strong tinge of the Soviet model. Like, you have 5-year plans, you have central planning, which kept India in proverbial poverty. And it's only in 1991 that Narasimha Rao, the best prime minister India ever had, introduced some form of liberalization, which unshackled the energies of the Indian people, which were on full display in the diaspora, and which then started doing to India what we can now see all around us. Let's limit myself to the important things. About the Frankfurter Schule, you will learn in a moment from Professor Babones. But so that was a reaction after the First World War to the failure of Karl Marx's predictions. You see, he had expected that the working class would reject fighting one another in the First World War, whereas in every country they voted for the war budget. And so, you know, nationalism appeared to be stronger than class solidarity. And so how come? So one answer is the Frankfurter Schule, another is Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, who was the leader of the Italian Communist Party. So he said we have to first conquer the cultural sphere and then the economic revolution will follow. There was a resistance in India under the Society for the Defense of Freedom in Asia with Sitaram Goel. In 1962, the Chinese invaded, and as Goel's analysis is, because it's still a mystery, why did the Chinese stop, not conquer more of India? So he says the whole thing was a pinprick of China against a Soviet ally, which India was at the time, to send a message to the Russians. And so they were not really attacking India, although, of course, the gain in territory was welcome. Their main importance in India is the control of the cultural and educational sphere, which happened mostly around 1970 when Indira Gandhi needed allies, and so she bartered with the communists, giving them that control. So it's mostly soft power that they have, and even though they lost the elections the last few times, that soft power is still continuing. In the educational sphere especially, that goes on. So the thing to do is some kind of civilizational force that gradually phases out this Marxist influence. Thank you.
Thank you, Koenraad.